Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Blotz from Fox 9 in Minneapolis. Welcome to our streaming coverage of Day 3 of the federal civil rights trial for the three former Minneapolis police officers who assisted in the arrest of George Floyd. Those three officers are J. Alexander King, Thomas Lane, and Tu Tao. All three are accused of depriving George Floyd of his civil rights on May 25th of 2020. That's when he was placed under arrest after trying to pass a counterfeit $20 bill at the Cup Foods there in the corner of 38th and Chicago in Minneapolis. Now, Derek Chauvin, of course, he was the fourth officer on the scene that day. He has already pleaded guilty in this civil rights case. He is also in prison at the moment after a Hennepin County jury found him guilty of killing George Floyd. Rob Olson is in federal court in St. Paul. He's been in this trial every day so far. He joins us now live with an update from what's taken place so far this morning. Rob, so far, day 3 of the trial here, 2 witnesses on the stand today. Let's start with Derek Smith, and he was the paramedic who arrived on the scene attempting to save George Floyd's life that afternoon.
Yeah, he was on the stand first this morning for probably a couple hours, really, here. Derek Smith with Hennepin Healthcare EMS, a paramedic. He previously did testify in the murder trial of Derek Chauvin and testifying again here today, offering again much of the same testimony and evidence he provided there. But again, as we've pointed out over these last few days, the charges here are different. The defendants are different. These are the other 3 officers, and they're charged with civil rights violations, constitutional rights violations of failing to intervene with what Derek Chauvin was doing and failing to provide medical aid to George Floyd when he was clearly in distress. So again, while the evidence and testimony is similar, what the prosecutors are trying to do with that is prove very different charges. The defense attorneys, 3 of them, actually 4, because one of the defendants has 2 defense attorneys, also trying to then fight back or defend against those charges. So similar evidence, different kind of approaches to what they're trying to do with it. And he was this ambulance crew member, this EMS, Derek Smith, talked about, a lot about basically what happened when he arrived, what he saw when he arrived. Asked, you essentially took over the scene. He said, well, I didn't take over, but when I walked up, I said, get out of the way, because it was his turn to now provide medical aid. And very specifically, one of the defense attorneys, Earl Gray, who's representing Thomas Lane, Earl Gray very pointedly on cross-examination put up Officer Lane's body camera video to point out, he asked Derek Smith, whose hands are those on George Floyd's chest doing compressions? And, is that Officer Lane's? What is Officer Lane doing now with his hands? It appears that he's checking for a pulse. So the defense attorney trying to use that to show that Officer Lane, or ex-Officer Lane, did try to provide medical care, did try to respond to these things. What was interesting is when the prosecutor for the U.S. government came back to do redirect examination, she asked about CPR. That obviously it's ideal to start CPR immediately, which is essentially what he did. But she asked, is anyone who's CPR trained, should they have started CPR immediately? And he said, yes. You're connecting the dots here because she doesn't specifically say this, but seems to be getting at the fact that these officers are all CPR trained, and they could have begun that process minutes earlier, several minutes earlier, before Derek Smith arrived in that ambulance.
And Rob, so much of what this testimony is all about is laying foundational evidence to the jury so that they can get on the record as to what the scene was like that day, what are the proper procedures, what they saw, what they observed. We don't know what the prosecution is, how they're going to circle back, but I think as you said, connecting the dots, they're trying to establish that anyone with CPR training could have jumped in at any time to try and intervene with George Floyd's distress.
Yeah, and that is, again, a lot of times in a lot of these trials, you'll see these things, these questions that are asked, and they don't say why they're asking them. They're not making that conclusion or that point. That is saved for the closing argument, where they'll tell the jury, you heard this witness or that witness say this, and then they'll tell you why that's important. So in this case, it could be, you heard Derek Smith say that CPR could have been started, ideally should have been started as soon as there was medical distress. It could have been started by anybody with CPR training. That could be a closing argument statement, or it could come circle back with another witness, where they ask sort of the same thing to corroborate those types of things. The defense attorneys here, too, on cross-examination of Derek Smith, asked a lot, too, about his decision to go a few blocks away to do the medical care on George Floyd in the ambulance, inside. And again, they're not saying why they're asking these certain questions, but it appears that they're asking about, kind of insinuating perhaps, a delay in medical care on their part. Asked about safety, and he said, yes, I felt it was unsafe there because the crowd was agitated. So he directed to move a few blocks away to park. And then he clarified, too, that there's this conception in the public that you drive straight to the hospital. He says that's not always the case. I mean, you perform medical care right away on the scene, either before you transport, and then continue that during a transport. It's not just load them up and go. It's provide medical care, the immediate care that's needed, sometimes before you start moving and then while en route. So I think they're trying to get at, was there a delay in medical care of George Floyd? That it's not the officer's fault here that there was a delay in their case. And he clarified when the prosecution came back up to then take a stab at this, that no, he started medical care as soon as George Floyd was in the back of the ambulance. And he continues that while his partner is then driving the rig a few blocks away to then join in that, and then it's continued as they drive on from there.
And Rob, also of note here, you mentioned Earl Gray, who's representing Thomas Lane, and on cross-examination here with Derek Smith, asking him about Lane's participation in the ambulance. What was he doing? Fill us in on that particular line of questioning and what Derek Smith said.
Well, that's what he said, when showing Thomas Lane's body-worn camera, in which you see Thomas Lane doing chest compressions prior to using the machine that does automated chest compressions in the ambulance. And basically, that line of questioning of are these Officer Lane's hands? Well, yes, they are, because they're in front of the camera that Officer Lane or former Officer Lane was wearing that day. Basically asking, was that helpful? In my opinion, he was helpful, Derek Smith replied, because he was helping to try to provide medical care. So again, Earl Gray trying to establish that his client, Thomas Lane, did try to provide medical care to George Floyd in distress. The prosecution trying to prove here that it should have been provided far earlier than it was.
All right, and let's move on to the second witness now, because this is Jeremy Norton. He's a Minneapolis fire captain, and again, laying more of the foundational evidence about what he observed when he arrived on the scene with his fire rig that afternoon.
Yeah, and he also testified in Derek Chauvin's murder trial. So now coming back here for this to provide much of the same testimony, but again, for that different purpose, for these charges of constitutional rights violations. A lot of it, too, he went over the history. Again, this is a lot of what every witness does when they come up. Prosecutors will ask them a lot of biographical information and other things to lay a common base of knowledge out for jurors, right? A history. And how many of the calls that they respond to are medical calls. And he said a majority of our calls are medical calls. We respond to fires and everything else. And, asked about the history. Well, decades ago, realized that fire stations are the way they're positioned geographically. They're often closer to a scene than an ambulance is in the area. So they respond automatically.
And
then
Robin,
went through when that call. Yeah.
I'm sorry. And in this case, that rig was on the scene very fast, right?
Yeah, and they went through when the call came in. It was at 8:30, and then they've got the log of when that they were en route and when they arrived. They arrived on the scene 2 minutes and 18 seconds after the call came in. They departed the station under a minute from getting the call, which is what fire crews do. They respond very quickly, and they were there very quickly as well. And, mentioned too that it came in as a code 2, which is non-emergency. And the dispatch said it was a call of somebody with a mouth injury. Yeah, he said, I believe it said assist one with a mouth injury. That's what they were told when they were dispatched. En route, it changed to a code 3, emergency situation. And we were just getting into, what he did then and what he saw when he arrived there. Again, 2 minutes and 18 seconds after the call came in, when they decided to take a break for lunch.
And we are expecting Jeremy back on the stand again when they reconvene here at about 1:30?
Yeah, we do, because again, he had just gotten started here with the initial setting the scene, the history, why they responded to these, and then how they responded to this, and just getting up to their arrival on the scene when they took this break. So he'll be on the stand for quite a while yet, under direct examination from the prosecutor before we start the cross-examination. So there's a lot of ground to cover with him yet this afternoon.
All right, and Rob will have a complete update for us tonight on Fox 9 News at 5 o'clock. We will be back here again tomorrow at approximately this same time, always during the lunch break, to bring you up to speed on the testimony and the witnesses that were on the stand in the civil rights trial against the 3 former Minneapolis police officers. For us, for now, we will see you tonight on the news at 5 o'clock, and of course have stories throughout the night too. My name is Tim Blotz. On behalf of everyone here at Fox 9, thanks for joining into the stream here on fox9.com/live, also on our YouTube channel for updates here every day during the lunch hour from federal court. Thanks so much. Stay warm this afternoon and stay safe. We'll see you at 5 o'clock.